You're going to die poor and alone. The words still echoed in my mind as I stood in my new garden, pruning roses that cost more than most people spend on groceries in a month. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Linda Cooper, and at 66 years old, I thought I'd experienced every kind of pain life could offer. I was wrong. It all began 3 months ago with a cream-colored invitation card that arrived in my mailbox. The expensive cardstock felt heavy in my hands, the kind my daughter-in-law, Emily, insisted on using for everything. Join us for an intimate family celebration, it read in her perfectly scripted handwriting. My son David was turning 38, and they were hosting a dinner at Bellini's, one of those restaurants where a single meal costs more than my weekly grocery budget. I should have known better. Nothing Emily organized was ever truly about family. I spent the entire afternoon getting ready, choosing my best dress from the small collection I'd maintained since Robert's funeral 3 years ago, the navy blue one with tiny pearl buttons that he'd always loved. I even splurged on having my silver hair professionally styled at Margot's salon downtown. Foolish, really, considering my tight budget, but it was my only son's birthday. Some occasions called for special effort. The restaurant Emily had chosen screamed money crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths so crisp they could cut paper, and waiters who moved like dancers around tables. The hostess led me to their table, her smile professional but distant. David stood to greet me, and for a moment I saw flashes of the little boy who used to run into my arms after school, his father's warm brown eyes in a face that had grown more angular with age. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said, embracing him. He felt stiffer than I remembered, more formal. Emily had trained him well in the 6 years they'd been married. "Thanks for coming, Mom," he said. His smile seemed genuine enough, but there was something distant in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Emily sat beside him, her dark skin glowing under the restaurant lights, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her hair was swept into an elaborate updo, not a strand out of place. She offered me a tight smile that never reached her eyes. "Linda, how lovely you look. Presentable." The word hung in the air like a slap. Presentable. Not beautiful, not elegant, not even nice. Presentable, as if I were a charity case she was graciously allowing at their table. The evening started innocuously enough. David talked about his promotion at the law firm. Emily mentioned their upcoming vacation to the Bahamas, and I listened, nodding at appropriate moments, trying to contribute when I could. But every comment I made seemed to amuse Emily in ways that made my chest tighten. When the waiter brought the wine list, Emily made a show of ordering something expensive. "We'll have the Chateau Margaux," she announced, then glanced at me with mock concern. "Oh, but maybe we should order something more economical. I know things have been tight since you moved to that little apartment." My cheeks burned. Yes, I lived in a modest rental now. After Robert died, the big house felt too empty, too full of memories, but the way she said it made it sound like I was living in squalor. "The wine sounds lovely," I managed, my voice steady despite the humiliation creeping up my throat. Dinner conversation continued, but I noticed how Emily steered every topic toward money, success, and their comfortable life. When I mentioned volunteering at the community center, she laughed, actually laughed. "Oh, Linda, that's so sweet, playing bingo with other lonely old ladies. How fulfilling that must be for you." David said nothing. He just cut his steak and avoided my eyes. The breaking point came when Emily excused herself to the restroom. I thought maybe I could connect with my son, talk to him the way we used to before she came into the picture. But when I reached across the table to touch his hand, he pulled away. Mom, about your living situation. He started, his voice uncomfortable. What about it? Well, Emily and I have been talking. We're concerned about you living alone in that neighborhood. Maybe it's time to consider other options. Other options? The words chilled me. What kind of other options? Before he could answer, Emily returned, sliding into her seat with a satisfied smile. Oh, good. You're discussing Linda's future. I was telling David just yesterday how worried we are. She leaned forward, her voice dripping with false concern. Honey, you're not getting any younger, living alone, struggling to make ends meet. It's not sustainable. There are some lovely assisted living facilities that offer very reasonable rates. The room seemed to tilt. Assisted living. They wanted to put me away. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Emily's laugh was sharp, cutting. Oh, sweetheart, of course you think that, but let's be realistic. You're living in a tiny rental, probably eating canned soup for dinner, volunteering just to have somewhere to go during the day. It's honestly quite sad. She reached for her wine glass, taking a leisurely sip before delivering the final blow. I mean, let's face it, you're going to die poor and alone anyway. Wouldn't it be better to have some dignity in your final years? The words hit me like physical blows. Die poor and alone, the casual cruelty of it. The way she smiled as she said it, as if she were discussing the weather. I looked at David, waiting for him to defend me, to tell his wife she'd gone too far. He said nothing, just stared at his plate, his jaw tight but his mouth firmly shut. Emily continued, apparently enjoying my silence. We're only thinking of what's best for you. David works so hard, and we're planning to start a family soon. We can't be expected to take care of you, too. Take care of me, as if I were a burden they'd been graciously carrying instead of the woman who'd raised David alone after his father died, who'd worked double shifts as a high school art teacher to pay for his college, who'd celebrated every achievement and comforted him through every disappointment. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking. Excuse me, I whispered, grabbing my purse. Where are you going? Emily called after me, but I didn't answer. I walked through that elegant restaurant on unsteady legs, past tables full of families who actually seemed to love each other, past couples holding hands over candlelit dinners. The hostess smiled as I passed, probably thinking I was heading to the restroom. Instead, I walked straight out into the cool night air and kept walking until I reached my car. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the keys. Behind me, I could hear the restaurant door opening, footsteps on the pavement. Mom, wait! David's voice called out. I turned, hope flickering in my chest. Maybe he'd come to apologize, to tell me Emily had been out of line. You can't just leave like that. Emily feels terrible about what she said. I stared at my son, this man I'd raised, looking for any sign of the boy who used to defend me against playground bullies. Does she? Of course she does. She was just trying to help. We both are. There it was. Even now, he was taking her side, making excuses for her cruelty. I realized with crushing clarity that I'd already lost my son. Emily had won completely. Tell her not to worry about me, I said quietly, getting into my car. I'll be just fine. As I drove away, I saw them in my rearview mirror, David and Emily, standing together on the sidewalk, probably already discussing how dramatic I was being, how unreasonable. That night, alone in my small apartment, I sat in Robert's old chair and cried until there were no tears left. But somewhere between the grief and the humiliation, something else began to grow. Something harder, more determined. They thought they knew me. They thought I was just a poor, pathetic old woman with nothing left but their reluctant charity. How wrong they were. The morning after David's birthday dinner, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The tears were gone, replaced by something much more dangerous: determination. I made my coffee the way Robert used to, strong and black, and sat at my small kitchen table with a framed photo of my late husband. His kind eyes seemed to look right through me, even from beyond the grave. "They think I'm helpless. Robert," I whispered to his photograph. Our own son stood there and let her talk to me like I was garbage. The pain was still fresh, a deep ache that made it hard to breathe. I could still hear Emily's voice, the casual way she'd said those words. "You're going to die poor and alone." But beneath the pain, something else was stirring. A quiet resolve that had been dormant since Robert's death 3 years ago. I showered and dressed with deliberate care, choosing clothes I hadn't worn in months. A tailored blue pantsuit that had been my teaching uniform for years. I applied makeup, fixed my hair, and put on the pearl earrings Robert had given me for our 30th anniversary. The woman who looked back at me from the mirror wasn't the broken widow who'd left that restaurant last night. She was someone stronger, someone who'd raised a son alone after losing her husband to cancer when David was only 10. Someone who'd spent 30 years shaping young minds as an art teacher at Lincoln High School. Someone who deserved better than what David and Emily had offered. My phone rang, David's name flashing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. Finally, I answered. "Hello, David?" "Mom, thank God, I've been calling all morning." His voice was strained, like he was forcing himself through an unpleasant task. "Look, about last night. What about it?" My voice was steadier than I expected. "Emily feels horrible about what she said. She didn't mean it the way it sounded." I almost laughed. "How did she mean it, then?" "She was just concerned about your future. We both are. Maybe we didn't express it well, but we love you." Love. The word sounded hollow coming from him now after his silence last night. "I see. So you'll forgive her. Maybe come over for dinner this weekend. Emily wants to apologize properly." I imagined Emily practicing her apology in the mirror, perfecting just the right tone of manufactured remorse. "I'll think about it," I said, and hung up. I spent the rest of the morning cleaning my apartment with methodical precision, as if I could scrub away the memory of last night's humiliation. Around noon, I forced myself to eat a sandwich, though I had no appetite. Then I sat down at my desk and pulled out a key I hadn't used in months, the key to a safe deposit box at First National Bank. An hour later, I was sitting in a private room at the bank, staring at the contents of the box Robert and I had maintained for decades. Inside were documents that told a very different story than the one Emily thought she knew. Most people would be surprised to learn that the poor old woman living in a modest rental apartment was worth just over $2 million. Robert had been brilliant with money, not just the steady income from his job as an economics professor at the state university, but smart investments that grew quietly over 40 years of marriage. Apple and Microsoft stock purchased in the 80s. Real estate investments in neighborhoods everyone said would never amount to anything. A diversified portfolio that weathered every market crash and came out stronger. When he died, he left me everything. "Take care of yourself, Linda." His letter had said, "You deserve better than anyone has ever given you credit for." But I'd made a conscious choice to live simply after his death. Grief had made me withdraw from the world. I'd sold our large house, unable to bear the emptiness, and moved to a smaller place. I'd stopped attending social functions, stopped traveling, stopped doing many of the things we'd loved doing together. And then, after David married Emily, I'd watched her transform my sweet, thoughtful son into someone I barely recognized. Someone who cared more about appearances than substance, more about what people could do for him than who they really were. So I decided to test them. I continued living modestly, drove an older car, dressed simply. I wanted to see what kind of people they'd become when they thought I had nothing to offer them. I'd hoped I was wrong. I'd prayed that David would invite me over just to spend time together, that Emily would show some genuine kindness, that they'd love me for who I was rather than what I could provide. Last night had answered that question definitively. Now, looking at the financial statements spread before me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the power to choose my own future, the power to show them exactly who Linda Cooper really was. I gathered the documents and returned them to the safe deposit box, keeping only what I needed. Then I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Margaret Chen, the attorney who had handled Robert's estate and had been managing my financial affairs since then. "Linda, how lovely to hear from you." Margaret's warm voice came through the phone. "How are things?" "Complicated," I said. "I need to make some changes to my will." There was a brief pause. "Of course. What kind of changes?" I took a deep breath, thinking of David's silence at the restaurant, his inability to defend me against his wife's cruelty. "I want to remove my son as beneficiary." Margaret's pause was longer this time. "That's a significant decision. May I ask why?" "Let's just say I've learned some things about his character that concern me." "All right. Who would you like to designate instead?" I'd been thinking about this all morning. There was a charity Robert and I had supported for years, Silver Connections, which provided companionship and support for elderly people who'd been abandoned by their families, people like I was becoming. "I want everything to go to Silver Connections," I said. "Every penny." "That's very generous. Linda, are you absolutely certain about this? It's not irreversible, but it is substantial." I thought about Emily's laugh, her casual dismissal of my life as meaningless. "I'm certain. I'll draft the documents. When would you like to come in to sign them?" "Today, if possible." After I hung up, I made my second call to Patricia Vance, a real estate agent who had helped us buy our last home before Robert got sick. "Linda Cooper, it's been ages." Patricia's voice boomed through the phone. "How are you, darling?" "I'm looking to buy a house," I said, bypassing small talk. "Really? That's wonderful, downsizing from the apartment." I smiled for the first time in what felt like days. "Actually, I'm looking for something substantial." By the time I arrived at Margaret Chen's office that afternoon, I felt like a different person than the one who had been humiliated at Bellini's the night before. Margaret greeted me with a warm hug, her elegant gray suit a reminder of the professional woman she'd always been. "Linda," she said, gesturing me to a comfortable chair in her office, "I've prepared the documents as you requested, but I have to ask, are you absolutely sure about this? Cutting David out completely is a significant step." I settled into the chair, my resolve only strengthening as I thought about the events of the previous night. "Let me tell you what happened," I said. For the next 20 minutes, I recounted every detail of the birthday dinner, Emily's condescension, her suggestion that I move to assisted living, and finally, her cruel declaration that I would die poor and alone. I told Margaret about David's silence, his refusal to defend me, and his weak attempt at peacemaking afterward. By the time I finished, Margaret's expression had hardened. As both my attorney and my friend for over 15 years, she'd watched David grow up, had attended his law school graduation, had even helped him prepare for the bar exam. "I see," she said simply, but the disappointment in her voice was evident. "And you're certain this isn't a reaction that might change once the hurt subsides?" I shook my head. "This isn't the first time. Margaret, it's just the most blatant. For years, Emily has been treating me like an inconvenience, and David has been allowing it. Last night just confirmed what I've suspected for a long time in their eyes. I'm nothing but a burden they're waiting to be rid of. Margaret nodded, her fingers laced together on her desk. And you want everything to go to Silver Connections. Yes, Robert and I always believed in their mission. People shouldn't be abandoned just because they've grown old. The irony isn't lost on me, Margaret said with a small smile. All right, Linda, I've prepared the documents. Once you sign them, your new will shall be in effect immediately. David will receive nothing upon your death, no money, no property, no personal effects. Everything will go to Silver Connections. She pushed the papers across the desk, along with a pen. Would you like to read through them first? Please. I spent the next half hour carefully reading every word of the document that would disinherit my only child. It felt surreal, like I was reading about someone else's life. But with each paragraph, my resolve strengthened. This wasn't about punishment. This was about finally valuing myself enough to not accept such treatment, even from my own son. When I was finished reading, I signed my name with a steady hand. Margaret witnessed it, as did her assistant, making it official. There's one more thing, I said as Margaret was filing the documents. I'd like you to draft a letter to be delivered to David after my death, something that explains why I made this decision. Margaret's expression softened. That's a good idea. It might help him understand, eventually. Would you like to dictate it now? I nodded. Dear David, I began, the words coming more easily than I expected. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've just discovered that you've been removed from my will. By the time I left Margaret's office, it was nearly 5 o'clock. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as I walked to my car. I felt lighter somehow, as if signing those documents had lifted a weight I hadn't known I was carrying. My phone had 3 missed calls from David and a text message. Mom, please call me back. We're worried about you. I didn't respond. Instead, I drove to my favorite restaurant, a small Italian place Robert and I had frequented for years, and treated myself to dinner. For the first time in months, I ordered a glass of wine with my meal and savored every sip. The waiter, an older gentleman named Carlo, who had known Robert and me as regulars, seemed pleased to see me. It's good to have you back, Mrs. Cooper, he said as he brought my cannoli for dessert. The professor would be happy to see you enjoying yourself. I smiled at him, touched by his kindness. Thank you, Carlo. I think he would, too. That night, I slept better than I had in months, dreamless and deep. When I woke the next morning, I felt renewed, ready for the next phase of my plan. Patricia Vance had already texted me a list of properties to consider. Houses much larger and more expensive than my modest apartment. Houses that would make Emily's eyes widen with envy. I smiled as I scrolled through the listings, imagining their reactions when they discovered that poor, pathetic Linda Cooper wasn't so poor after all. Emily thought I was going to die poor and alone. How little she understood about the power of a woman who'd finally stopped caring what anyone else thought. The house hunting began that Monday morning. I'd spent the weekend researching properties online, but nothing had prepared me for the reality of what my money could buy. Mrs. Cooper, my realtor, Patricia Vance, said as we pulled into the circular driveway of the third property that day. I think you're going to love this one. She wasn't wrong. The colonial-style mansion sat on 2 acres of perfectly manicured grounds with towering oak trees that must have been 100 years old. 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a library with built-in shelves that reached the ceiling, and a kitchen that belonged in a magazine. The asking price was $850,000, a fortune to most people, but well within my means. It's beautiful, I breathed, running my fingers along the marble countertops in the kitchen. Through the bay window, I could see a garden that would be spectacular in spring, and beyond that, a small pond with a wooden bridge. The previous owners were an elderly couple who maintained it impeccably, Patricia explained. They moved to Florida last month. All the major systems have been updated. She paused, looking at me with a knowing smile. And that library, I understand you mentioned loving to read. I nodded, picturing myself in that room with its leather chairs and fireplace, surrounded by books instead of the silence of my small apartment. This was what Robert would have wanted for me. This was the life I deserved. I'll take it, I said. Patricia blinked. Don't you want to see the upstairs or discuss the offer? We could probably negotiate full asking price. I interrupted. Cash sale. How quickly can we close? Her surprise was almost comical. Well, with a cash offer, probably within 2 weeks. Are you certain? Absolutely. By Wednesday, the paperwork was complete. By Friday, I was signing closing documents and receiving the keys to my new home. I'd never felt more empowered in my life. The moving process was simple. I hired professionals to handle everything while I supervised from my new library, already furnished with a few pieces I'd ordered online. I'd kept only the things that mattered: Robert's photographs, my books, and a few pieces of furniture with sentimental value. Everything else was donated or sold. I waited until I was fully settled before calling David. 3 weeks had passed since his birthday dinner, and I hadn't spoken to him since our brief phone conversation the morning after, though he'd called several times and left increasingly concerned voicemails. "Mom, where have you been?" he answered on the first ring. "We've been worried sick. I was about to file a missing person report." "I've been busy moving," I said calmly, settling into my new leather chair, looking out at my garden where workers were planting spring bulbs. "Moving? What do you mean? Moving where?" "I bought a house, David, a proper house." The silence on the other end stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, he spoke, his voice strained with confusion. "You bought a house. How, I mean, what kind of house?" "A lovely colonial on Maple Ridge Drive, 6 bedrooms, beautiful grounds. I'm very happy with it." Maple Ridge Drive. His voice cracked slightly. Maple Ridge was one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the city, where judges, surgeons, and corporate executives lived. "Mom, those houses cost more than you expected I could afford. I imagine." Another long pause. "I don't understand. Where did you get the money?" I could have explained then. I could have told him about the investments, about Robert's careful planning, about the life insurance policies and rental properties. Instead, I simply said, "Your father was a very wise man with money. But you said, you were struggling, the small apartment, the tight budget. I chose to live simply. David, there's a difference." I could hear muffled voices in the background. Emily, no doubt, demanding to know what was happening. Then David's voice became more formal, more distant. "Well, that's wonderful. Mom, really, we should come see it." "You should, this weekend. Saturday afternoon would be fine." After I hung up, I walked through my beautiful new home, imagining the conversation that was undoubtedly happening between David and Emily. I'd seen enough of their relationship to predict exactly how it would go. Emily would be incredulous, perhaps even angry. How dare I hide my wealth from them? How dare I pretend to be struggling when I could afford a house on Maple Ridge Drive? David would be confused, hurt that I hadn't confided in him. But also, and this was the part that pained me, calculating how my newfound wealth might benefit them. I spent the rest of the week putting the finishing touches on my new home. I hired a gardener to plant roses along the front walkway, the expensive, fragrant variety that bloomed from spring until the first frost. I ordered custom curtains for every window, plush rugs for the hardwood floors, and artwork for the walls, not the mass-produced prints I'd had in my apartment. but original pieces from local artists. By Saturday, my transformation was complete. The woman who would greet David and Emily bore little resemblance to the poor old lady they'd pitied at the birthday dinner. My hair was freshly styled in a sleek silver bob. My clothes were designer labels I'd secretly owned for years, but rarely worn. And my home, my magnificent new home, was a testament to the life Robert and I had built together. As I arranged fresh flowers in a crystal vase on the entry table, I caught my reflection in the mirror. For the first time in years, I looked like myself again, the woman I'd been before grief and loneliness had convinced me to make myself small. The doorbell rang precisely at 2 o'clock. I smoothed my silk blouse, took a deep breath, and went to meet my son and his wife. David stood on my doorstep, his expression a mixture of awe and confusion as he took in the grand entrance of my new home. Emily stood beside him, her usual composure fractured by naked curiosity and calculation. "Mom," David said, stepping forward to embrace me. "This is incredible." I returned his hug briefly, noting how his eyes darted past me to take in the marble foyer, the sweeping staircase, the glimpse of the sunlit living room beyond. "Thank you, David. Please, come in. Emily, welcome to my home." Emily's smile was strained as she followed us inside. "Linda, what a surprise. This is quite substantial." I watched as they took in each room of my new kingdom, the spacious living room with its vaulted ceiling and stone fireplace, the dining room that could easily seat 12, the gourmet kitchen with top-of-the-line appliances, the sunroom overlooking the garden. With each room we entered, Emily's expression grew more calculated, her eyes more assessing. David seemed genuinely happy for me, but there was something else there, too. A dawning realization that the mother he thought he knew had been keeping secrets. When we reached the master suite, a spacious room with a sitting area and French doors opening onto a private balcony, Emily finally dropped her facade. "This is enormous," she said, running her hand along the silk curtains. "Much too big for one person, really." "I like the space," I replied evenly. "Oh, of course, but practically speaking." She turned to face me with that sharp smile I'd come to know so well. "I mean, at your age, is it really safe to be rattling around in a house this size? All these stairs, the maintenance, the isolation?" David shifted uncomfortably. "Emily, I'm just being practical, honey. Your mother is nearly 70. What if she falls? What if something happens? Who would even know?" I led them back downstairs to the living room where I'd laid out coffee and pastries on the antique table I'd inherited from my grandmother. As we sat, Emily continued her assault under the guise of concern. "The property taxes alone must be astronomical," she mused, selecting a croissant. "And heating costs, insurance, upkeep. It seems like such a burden for someone on a fixed income." "I manage just fine," I said, pouring coffee from the silver service that had been my wedding gift from Robert's parents. Emily exchanged a meaningful look with David before continuing. "Well, that's wonderful, of course, but we've been thinking, haven't we, honey, about our future. We're trying to start a family, and with David's new position at the firm, we're outgrowing our current place." I sipped my coffee and waited. "What Emily's trying to say," David interjected, his voice carefully casual, "is that this house would be perfect for a growing family. All these bedrooms going to waste, the big yard for children to play in. It would be ideal." "It would," Emily agreed, her eyes bright with anticipation. "And you'd have company. You wouldn't be alone anymore. We could take care of you, help with the maintenance and expenses." The audacity of it took my breath away. They were actually suggesting that I'd bought this house for them, that my careful planning, my years of financial discipline, my independence, all of it was somehow meant to benefit them. Plus, Emily continued, warming to her theme. It would be so much better for the children. This neighborhood, these schools, they're exactly what we want for our family. David leaned forward, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the little boy I'd raised. What do you think, Mom? Wouldn't it be nice to have family around to hear children's laughter in these rooms? They sat there, both of them, waiting for my response with the confident expectation that I would, of course, see the wisdom in their suggestion, that I would be grateful for their willingness to rescue me from the burden of my beautiful home. I set down my coffee cup very carefully and looked at each of them in turn. That's an interesting proposal, I said finally. Emily's smile widened. I knew you'd see the sense in it. We could work out all the details. Maybe you could keep the master suite, and we could use the other bedrooms. The children would love having Grandma right there. Emily's already been sketching out ideas for the nursery, David added. That sunny room on the second floor would be perfect. I nodded thoughtfully. You've certainly given this considerable thought. We just want what's best for everyone, Emily said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. It's what family does. We take care of each other. Family, the word that had been used to manipulate me for years, to make me accept less, expect less, settle for crumbs of affection while giving everything in return. I smiled then, a real smile, the first genuine one I'd worn in their presence in years. You're absolutely right, Emily. Families should take care of each other. I stood up, smoothing my skirt, and walked to the window overlooking my garden. Behind me, I could hear them whispering excitedly, already making plans for their new home. I need to make a phone call, I said, turning back to them. Would you excuse me for just a moment? As I walked toward my study, I heard Emily's delighted whisper to David, I told you she'd come around. This is going to be perfect. Perfect. Yes, I thought as I reached for my phone, it was going to be exactly that. I closed the study door behind me and leaned against it for a moment, listening to the muffled sounds of excitement from the living room. Emily's voice carried clearly through the walls as she described her vision for our new home to David, our home, as if she'd already moved in, already taken possession. My hands were surprisingly steady as I picked up the phone and dialed Margaret's number. Margaret Chen's office. This is Sarah. This is Linda Cooper. I need to speak with Margaret immediately. It's urgent. One moment, please, Mrs. Cooper. The hold music seemed to stretch on forever, punctuated by bursts of laughter from the other room. I could picture Emily examining my belongings with new eyes, no longer seeing them as mine, but as hers. The crystal vases that had been wedding gifts, the paintings Robert and I had collected during our travels, the antique furniture passed down through generations, all of it being mentally redistributed to suit her taste. Linda, Margaret's voice was concerned. Sarah said it was urgent. Is everything all right? I need to make immediate changes to my will, today if possible. What kind of changes? We just updated everything 3 weeks ago. I walked to the window, looking out at the garden where I'd planned to spend peaceful mornings with my coffee and books. In the reflection, I could see my own face calm, determined, finally free of the desperate hope that had kept me clinging to the illusion of family love. I want to add specific language about my house, very specific language. All right, what did you have in mind? I want it clearly stated that under no circumstances is my son or his wife to inherit this property. They are never to live here, never to own it, never to benefit from it in any way. Margaret's pause was longer this time. Linda, that's quite definitive. May I ask what's prompted this? Through the door, I could hear David's voice. The master bedroom has such good natural light. You'd love the walk-in closet, Emily. They're here now, I said quietly. In my home, already planning how to redecorate it. where to put the children's rooms, how to help me manage the burden of homeownership. I see. Margaret's tone had shifted to professional concern. Are you feeling pressured because if there's any question of elder abuse or manipulation? No, I interrupted. Nothing like that. They're not forcing me to do anything. They're simply showing me exactly who they are, and I'm finally listening. What else would you like to specify? I thought of Emily's excited whispers, of David's casual assumption that my life's work was somehow meant to benefit him. I want the house to go to Silver Connections as well, along with everything else. And I want a clause stating that if either my son or his wife attempts to contest the will, they forfeit any right to even visit the property during the charity's ownership. That's legally enforceable, Margaret confirmed. Anything else? Yes, I want you to draft a letter to be delivered to them after my death. Something that explains exactly why these decisions were made. Would you like to dictate that now? I could hear Emily's voice getting closer to the study door. They were coming to find me, probably wondering what was taking so long. Not over the phone. Can you come here today? I can be there in an hour. Will that work? Perfect. Use the back entrance through the garden gate. I'll be waiting in the sunroom. After I hung up, I took a moment to compose myself before returning to my guests. They were standing in the center of my living room, Emily with her phone out, apparently taking pictures. Just getting some measurements, she said with that bright smile. For furniture placement, I hope you don't mind. Not at all. I settled back into my chair, noting how they'd both remained standing, as if sitting would somehow delay their planning process. Did you want to see the rest of the house? The basement is finished. It would make a wonderful playroom. Emily's eyes lit up. Oh, that sounds perfect. And the attic, storage space mostly, but it could be converted perhaps into a home office. For the next hour, I played the part they expected the grateful elderly woman, overwhelmed by her good fortune and their generous offer to share it. I nodded as Emily described her decorating ideas, smiled as David pointed out practical improvements they could make, even offered to show them the property boundaries so they could plan their garden. They ate it up. These two people who thought they knew me so well, who saw my politeness as weakness, my generosity as obligation, my love as something they could exploit without consequence. We should probably get going, David finally said, glancing at his watch. We have dinner plans with the Hendersons. Of course. I walked them to the door, accepting Emily's air kisses and David's distracted hug. We'll talk more about the arrangement soon, Emily said, already mentally inhabiting my home. There are so many details to work out, but I'm sure we can make it wonderful for everyone. I'm sure we can, I agreed. After their car disappeared down the driveway, I walked through my house with new eyes. Every room they'd claimed, every space they'd mentally redistributed, every assumption they'd made about my gratitude for their intervention. Margaret arrived exactly 1 hour later, carrying her leather briefcase and wearing the expression of someone prepared for difficult conversations. Show me the house, she said without preamble. I want to understand what we're protecting. I gave Margaret the full tour, explaining not just the property, but the scene that had played out earlier. She listened without comment, making notes in her precise handwriting. They really believe you bought this place for them, she asked as we settled in the sunroom with tea. Completely, in their minds, everything I do is somehow meant to benefit them. My financial struggles were an inconvenience to be managed. My success is an asset to be claimed. Margaret opened her briefcase and pulled out a legal pad. Let's draft that letter. What do you want them to know? I stared out at my garden, thinking of all the years I'd spent trying to earn their love, their respect, their simple acknowledgement of my worth as a human being. I want them to understand that love isn't one-sided, I said finally. That family isn't about what you can take from each other, but what you give freely. I want them to know that I saw through their performance, that I knew exactly what they thought of me, and the house specifically. I want them to know that this house, my house, will become a place where elderly people abandoned by their families can find community and care, that it will shelter people whose own children saw them as burdens rather than blessings. Margaret wrote quickly, her pen scratching across the paper. What else? I want them to know that I had a choice, that right up until today, I could have chosen differently, but they made it impossible to love them, and that's not my failure, it's theirs. As Margaret drafted the documents, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. For years, I'd blamed myself for the distance between David and me. I'd wondered what I could have done differently, how I could have been a better mother, a more deserving recipient of their affection. But today had shown me the truth. It wasn't about what I'd done or failed to do. It was about who they'd chosen to become, people who saw others only in terms of utility, who confused manipulation with love, who believed they were entitled to whatever they could take. There, Margaret said, looking up from her writing, how does this sound? She read the letter aloud, and I found myself nodding at each sentence. It was clear, honest, and final. No room for misinterpretation, no opportunity for them to rewrite the narrative in their favor. Perfect, I said. When can you have the will updated? I'll have everything ready for your signature by Monday. Are you absolutely certain about this, Linda? Once these documents are signed and notarized, they'll be very difficult to change. I thought of Emily's excited whispers, of David's casual assumption that my home was somehow his to claim. I thought of years of being treated like an inconvenience, a burden, a source of guilt and obligation rather than love. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. After Margaret left, I walked through my house one more time, seeing it not as the prize Emily thought she'd won, but as my sanctuary, my choice, my independence made manifest in brick and mortar and beautiful, peaceful rooms. Tomorrow, David would probably call to discuss their moving timeline. Emily would likely start shopping for furniture and making lists of renovations. They would plan their future in my space, with my money, using my generosity against me one final time. They had no idea that with every assumption, every entitled expectation, every casual dismissal of my autonomy, they were signing away any claim to my love, my money, or my beautiful home. In 3 days, the new will would be signed. In 3 days, their future would belong entirely to them without my house, without my money, and without any hope of claiming either. The thought should have made me sad. Instead, as I watched the sunset paint my garden in shades of gold and amber, I felt nothing but profound, peaceful satisfaction. They'd made their choice. Now I'd made mine. That night, I had dinner by myself in my new dining room, using the fine china Robert and I had reserved for special occasions. I opened a bottle of his favorite Cabernet and toasted his memory. You were right, my love, I said to the empty chair across from me. I do deserve better. I thought about Emily's background as I dined alone. She came from a middle-class family in Chicago. Her father a postal worker and her mother a school administrator. She'd worked hard to earn scholarships to an Ivy League university, where she'd met David during his final year of law school. I had always admired her drive and ambition, her determination to prove herself in an upper-class world that often looked down on her because of her race and modest background. I had once believed her struggle would make her more compassionate, more understanding of others' difficulties. Instead, it seemed to have hardened her, made her desperate to climb higher, regardless of who she stepped on along the way, including me. I wondered if that was why she'd been so cruel at the birthday dinner, if my modest apartment and simple life reminded her too much of where she'd come from, of what she might return to if things ever went wrong. It didn't excuse her behavior, but perhaps it explained it. David was harder to understand. He'd grown up with privilege, not extravagant wealth, but comfort and security. Robert and I had made sure he never wanted for anything important. We'd paid for his education, supported his dreams, celebrated his achievements. How had he become someone who could stand by while his wife insulted his mother, who could see his mother's new home as something to be claimed rather than celebrated? I went to bed that night with these questions still circling in my mind, but I slept soundly nonetheless, for the first time in years. I felt like I was finally standing up for myself, not just reacting to what others wanted from me, but actively choosing my own path. The next morning, I woke to the sound of birds outside my window and sunlight streaming through the curtains. I made coffee and carried it out to the garden, where I sat watching the early light play across the dew-covered roses. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Mom, Emily and I have been talking. We'd like to start moving some things over this weekend, if that works for you. Nothing major yet, just some clothes and personal items. Let me know." I didn't respond. Let them wonder. Let them plan. Let them believe whatever they wanted to believe. For the next 3 days, I ignored their calls and texts, focusing instead on making my new house truly mine. I unpacked the last of my books, arranged my art supplies in the small room off the kitchen that would become my studio, and spent hours in the garden planting herbs and flowers. On Monday morning, I drove to Margaret's office and signed the updated will with a steady hand. It was done. My house and all my assets would go to Silver Connections upon my death. David and Emily would receive nothing. "I've added the clause about contesting the will," Margaret said as I signed the final document. "If they try to challenge it in court, they'll be permanently banned from the property. Given David's legal background, I think he'll understand the implications. Thank you, Margaret, for everything." She squeezed my hand. "You're doing the right thing, Linda. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the most necessary ones." I was about to leave when Margaret's assistant knocked on the door. "Excuse me, Ms. Chen, but there's a Mr. Cooper on the phone. He says it's urgent and that he needs to speak with you." Margaret and I exchanged a glance. "He's calling you directly?" I asked. "How would he even know to do that? He's a lawyer," Margaret said grimly. "It wouldn't be hard for him to find out who handled your late husband's estate." She turned to her assistant. "Tell him I'm in a meeting and will call him back." "Do you think someone at the bank told him about the accounts?" I asked after the assistant left. "It's possible, though it would be a serious breach of confidentiality. More likely, he's piecing things together and getting worried." She looked at me with concern. "Be prepared, Linda. Once they realize what's happening, they may not react well." "I'm ready," I said, and I meant it. The call came at 7 in the morning, 3 days after I'd signed the new will. I was in my kitchen savoring my first cup of coffee while watching birds gather at the feeder I'd installed outside the window. The caller ID showed David's number, and something in the urgency of the early hour told me this wasn't a social call. "Mom, we need to talk right now." No greeting, no pleasantries. His voice carried an edge I hadn't heard since he was a teenager caught in a lie. "Good morning to you too, David. What's so urgent?" "Don't play games with me. I know what you did." I sat down my coffee cup carefully, though my heart had begun to race. "What exactly do you think I did?" "The will, Mom. Margaret Chen's office called yesterday. Something about updated documents and needing to confirm the property address." "Ah, Margaret had warned me that routine verification calls were standard practice, but I'd hoped we'd have more time before the confrontation." Still, I felt oddly calm as I prepared for what was coming. "I see." "And what did they tell you?" "Nothing directly, But when I pressed them about why they needed our property information, they said it wasn't relevant since we weren't beneficiaries. We aren't beneficiaries. Mom, the accusation hung in the air between us. I could hear Emily's voice in the background, sharp and demanding, though I couldn't make out the words. Would you like to come over and discuss this? We're already on our way. The line went dead. I looked around my peaceful kitchen, knowing it might be the last quiet moment I'd have for a while. Then I went upstairs to dress properly for what was about to be a very difficult day. They arrived within 20 minutes, which meant they'd been calling from their car. Emily's face was flushed with anger when I opened the door, and David looked like he hadn't slept. Inside, now, Emily demanded, pushing past me into the foyer. I followed them into the living room where they both remained standing, positioned like prosecutors about to deliver an indictment. How could you do this to us? Emily's voice was shrill, all pretense of politeness abandoned. After everything we've done for you, after all our plans. What plans? I interrupted quietly. Don't act innocent, David snapped. You let us believe we were going to live here. You encouraged us to make plans for the children, for our future. I sat down in my favorite chair, the one that faced the garden. I did no such thing. I listened while you made assumptions. Assumptions? Emily's laugh was bitter. You showed us around like we were already living here. You talked about the children's rooms, about having family close by. I was being polite. You were guests in my home. Guests? David's voice cracked. I'm your son. Yes, you are, and I'm your mother. But that doesn't make my house your house or my money your money. Emily began pacing, her designer heels clicking angrily on my hardwood floors. This is insane. You're nearly 70 years old, living alone in a house that's way too big for you. We offered to help, to take care of you, and this is how you repay us. By maintaining ownership of my own property, by lying to us, she screamed, by letting us plan our lives around something you never intended to give us. I looked at David, who was staring at the floor, his hands clenched into fists. Is that how you see it, too? That I lied to you? He lifted his head, and for a moment, I saw something in his eyes that might have been pain. Mom, we need this house. My promotion comes with certain expectations, social obligations. Emily's pregnant. Pregnant? The word escaped before I could stop it. Emily's hand went to her still flat stomach, her expression shifting from anger to smugness. 3 months. We were going to tell you when we moved in. Make it a celebration. A grandchild. Another grandchild I would likely never know, never hold, never be allowed to love. The realization should have broken my heart, but instead, it strengthened my resolve. Congratulations, I said simply. Congratulations, that's it. Emily stared at me in disbelief. Your son is having a baby, and all you can say is congratulations. What would you like me to say? That you're sorry, that you'll fix this, that you'll put us back in the will where we belong. Where you belong, I repeated, and where exactly do you think that is? David stepped forward, his voice taking on the persuasive tone he used in court. Mom, let's be reasonable here. You don't need a house this size. The maintenance alone must be overwhelming, and with a baby coming, we really do need more space. So buy a bigger house. With what money? Emily shrieked. Do you know what houses cost in decent neighborhoods? Do you know what private schools cost? What it takes to give children the kind of life they deserve? The kind of life your child deserves. I corrected. Your responsibility, not mine. Emily's face went white with rage. You selfish, bitter old woman. No wonder your husband died and left you alone to raise David. No wonder your own son can barely stand to visit you. The words hit like physical blows. but I didn't flinch. Robert didn't leave me, Emily, he died. And if David can barely stand to visit me, why would you want to live in my house? Because it's not your house, she screamed. Not really. David is your only child, your only family. Everything you have should go to him automatically. That's how families work. Is it? I stood up, walking to the mantel where Robert's photograph sat beside pictures of David as a child. Tell me, Emily, in your family, did your parents work double shifts to pay for your college? Did they sacrifice their own comfort so you could have opportunities? That's different. That's what parents are supposed to do. And what are children supposed to do? She faltered for a moment, caught off guard by the question. David answered instead. Children are supposed to be grateful. They're supposed to take care of their parents when they get old. Take care of them, I repeated. Not take from them. Not treat them like inconveniences to be managed or assets to be claimed. We never treated you like an inconvenience, David protested. I turned to face him fully. Really? Then why did Emily suggest I move to assisted living? Why did she tell me I was going to die poor and alone? Why did you sit there and let her say those things? His face flushed. She was just concerned about your safety. No, she wasn't. She was concerned about her comfort, about not having to deal with an aging mother-in-law who might become a burden. Emily had stopped pacing and was staring at me with naked hatred. You're twisting everything. We offered to let you stay here, to take care of you. You offered to let me stay in my own house while you took it over. You offered to manage my life for me because you decided I wasn't capable of managing it myself. Because you're not, she exploded. Look at you, living alone, no friends, no social life, nothing to do but sit in this huge house and feel sorry for yourself. We were trying to help you. By taking my house, by giving your life meaning, by letting me be part of something bigger than my pathetic little existence. The words hung in the air like poison. David looked stricken, as if he was finally hearing what his wife actually thought of me. Emily, he said quietly, that's enough. No, it's not enough. She whirled on him. Your mother is being deliberately cruel. She's punishing us for trying to build a life, for wanting better for our children. She's a jealous, vindictive old woman who can't stand to see anyone else happy. I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder I prepared that morning. Inside were copies of the new will, along with the letter Margaret had helped me draft. Since you seem so interested in my will, I said, handing the folder to David, you might as well know the whole truth. He opened it with trembling hands, Emily reading over his shoulder. I watched their faces change as they absorbed the contents, confusion giving way to shock, shock to horror, horror to rage. You left everything to charity. David's voice was barely a whisper. To Silver Connections. Yes, they help elderly people who've been abandoned by their families. Abandoned. Emily's voice was dangerous now. We never abandoned you. Didn't you? When was the last time either of you called just to talk? When was the last time you invited me somewhere without wanting something? When was the last time you treated me like a person you loved instead of an obligation you resented? David was still staring at the papers. The house, the investments, everything, everything. Emily snatched the documents from his hands, scanning them frantically. This can't be legal. You can't just cut out your only child. There are laws. There are laws about elder abuse, I said calmly. There are laws about coercion and manipulation, but there are no laws requiring me to leave my money to people who treat me with contempt. We'll contest this, she snarled. We'll fight it in court. I smiled then, the first real smile I'd worn since they arrived. Read the last page. Emily, The part about what happens if you contest the will." Her eyes flew to the document, and I watched her face drain of color as she read the clause Margaret had insisted we include. "If you contest the will," I said pleasantly, "you forfeit any right to visit this property. Even after it becomes a care facility for abandoned elderly people, you'll be legally barred from ever setting foot here again." "You can't do this," David said, his voice breaking. "I'm your son." "Yes, you are, and I'm your mother. But being family doesn't give you the right to my life, my money, or my home. It certainly doesn't give you the right to treat me like a burden while expecting to inherit my assets." Emily threw the papers on the floor, her face twisted with fury. "You'll regret this when you're dying alone in this house, when you have no one to take care of you. You'll remember this moment and wish you'd been different." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the polished, beautiful woman who'd stolen my son's affection, but a small, grasping person whose entire sense of worth depended on what she could take from others. "I won't be dying alone, Emily. I'll be surrounded by people who've learned, as I have, that blood doesn't make family. Love does, respect does, and neither of you has shown me either in years." They left then, David gathering the scattered papers while Emily stormed toward the door. At the threshold, he turned back one last time. "Mom, please, there has to be a way to fix this." I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, loved, sacrificed for, and felt nothing but profound sadness for what he'd become. "There was always a way to fix this, David. You just never bothered to try." After the door closed behind them, I stood in my foyer, listening to their car start, listening to them drive away from my life for what I knew would be the last time. Then I walked to my kitchen, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and sat down to enjoy the most peaceful morning I'd had in years. The phone calls started that afternoon, first from David, then from Emily, then from friends of theirs who'd apparently been recruited to talk some sense into me. I let them all go to voicemail. Their messages ranged from pleading to threatening, from tearful apologies to legal intimidation. I listened to each one, then deleted them all. Margaret called the next day to check on me. "David came to my office," she said. "He was quite upset." I imagine he was. He wanted to know if there was a way to challenge the will. I told him the same thing I tell all my clients. Anything can be challenged in court, but given the circumstances, his chances of success were minimal, especially with the forfeiture clause. "Thank you. Margaret?" "He mentioned Emily is pregnant." I sighed. "Yes, 3 months along, apparently." "I'm sorry, Linda. I know this must be difficult for you." "It is, but not as difficult as watching them try to take over my life while pretending it was for my own good." After I hung up, I sat in my garden for a long time, thinking about the grandchild I might never know. It was a loss, certainly, but perhaps not an insurmountable one. There were other ways to have children in my life: volunteer work, mentoring programs, my neighbors' families. I wouldn't allow Emily and David to hold their child hostage to get what they wanted from me. That wasn't love. That was extortion. In the weeks that followed, I settled into a new routine. I joined a book club at the local library, took a watercolor class at the community center, and even went on a few coffee dates with a widower named James Chin Margaret's brother. As it happened, who shared my love of classical music and botanical gardens. I made friends with my neighbors, particularly Gloria Washington, a retired high school principal who lived across the street and had a wicked sense of humor. We started taking evening walks together, exchanging books, and occasionally sharing a bottle of wine on my patio while watching the sunset. Slowly, steadily, I built a life that had nothing to do with David or Emily or their expectations of me. A life that was entirely my own. The calls from them gradually decreased. from daily to weekly to monthly. Their tactics changed too, from anger to bargaining to what seemed like genuine remorse, at least on David's part, but I held firm. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt, or at least not easily. I did send a card when I heard through mutual friends that Emily had given birth to a healthy baby boy they'd named Michael. I enclosed a check for his education, made out to a trust fund in his name that neither Emily nor David could access until he turned 18. I received no acknowledgement. 6 months passed without a word from either of them. 6 months of the most peaceful, fulfilling life I'd lived since Robert's death. I'd thrown myself into activities I'd forgotten I enjoyed, hosting book clubs in my library, volunteering at the community center, taking painting classes at the local art studio. My house had become what it was always meant to be, a home, not a monument to loneliness. And then, on a Tuesday morning in spring, everything changed again. I was in my garden planting the roses I'd ordered from a specialty catalog when my phone rang from inside the house. I almost didn't answer it, but something about the persistence of the ringing made me wipe my hands on my gardening apron and go inside. "Hello, Mom." David's voice was smaller than I remembered, tentative in a way that reminded me of the little boy he'd once been. "Hello, David." I kept my voice neutral, neither welcoming nor rejecting. I was wondering if we could talk in person." I looked out at my garden, at the roses waiting to be planted, at the life I'd built without them. "What about us? About what happened? Emily and I were having some problems." Of course they were. I'd wondered how long it would take for the cracks to show once they realized my money wasn't coming to solve their difficulties. "I'm sorry to hear that. Could I come over?" "Just me. Emily she doesn't want me to contact you." Despite everything, he was still my son. Despite all the pain, all the disappointment, some small part of me had been waiting for this call. "All right, this afternoon." "Thank you, Mom. Really, thank you." After I hung up, I returned to my garden and finished planting the roses. Then I showered, changed into a casual but elegant outfit, and prepared a light lunch. I wasn't sure what David wanted, but I was determined to face it with dignity and clarity. He arrived at 200 driving the same BMW, but looking somehow diminished. The confident lawyer who'd stood in my living room 6 months ago demanding his inheritance had been replaced by a man who looked tired, uncertain, older than his 38 years. I met him at the door, noting how his eyes took in the changes I'd made. The foyer now held a small table with fresh flowers from my garden. Family photos lined the walls, not just pictures of him, but of Robert's relatives, of friends I'd reconnected with, of the book club members who'd become like daughters to me. "The house looks different," he said. "It looks lived in," I replied. "Would you like some coffee?" We sat in the sunroom, the space where I'd planned his disinheritance with Margaret. Now it was furnished with comfortable wicker chairs and plants that thrived in the afternoon light. An easel stood in one corner, holding my latest painting, a landscape of the view from my bedroom window. "You're painting now?" he asked, nodding toward the easel. "I always painted, David. I just stopped when your father died, then never found time to start again." "I remember. You used to paint at the kitchen table when I was little. You have a good memory." We sat in silence for several minutes. I waited, knowing he'd come here for a reason, knowing he needed to find his own way to it. "Emily left me," he said finally. I felt a pang of sadness, not for the marriage which had clearly been toxic, but for the pain my son was experiencing. "I'm sorry. Are you—" "She said you'd be happy. She said you probably planned this somehow." I set down my coffee cup carefully. "I didn't plan your marriage ending. David, I planned to protect myself from people who saw me only as a source of money. Is that really how you saw us? The question was asked with such genuine confusion that for a moment I glimpsed the son I'd raised, the boy who'd believed the world was fundamentally fair, that good intentions were always visible. How else could I see you? When was the last time you called just to check on me? When was the last time you visited without wanting something? When was the last time you treated me like a person you loved instead of an obligation you resented? He was quiet for so long, I thought he might not answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, I can't remember. Neither can I. But I did love you. I do love you. Do you? Or do you love the idea of me, the son who's supposed to be there whenever you need him? Who's supposed to sacrifice without question? Who's supposed to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention you throw his way? Tears gathered in his eyes. That's not, I never thought of it that way. I know you didn't. That's the problem. And he leaned forward, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Mom, I know I made mistakes. We both did. But I'm here now, trying to fix things. What exactly are you trying to fix? Our relationship, us. I miss you. Do you? Or do you miss the security of knowing I was there, ready to bail you out when things got difficult? His face flushed. That's not fair. Isn't it? Your wife left you, and suddenly you remember you have a mother. Your financial situation is probably strained without the inheritance you were counting on, and now you want to rebuild our relationship. The money doesn't matter. Stop. My voice was sharper than I'd intended. Don't lie to me, David. Not anymore. We're past that. He slumped back in his chair, looking defeated. Okay, yes, things are tight. The divorce is expensive, and we'd counted on, we'd hoped. You'd hoped to inherit my house and live here rent-free while using my savings as your personal bank account. When you put it like that, it sounds awful. Because it was awful. You and Emily treated me like a resource to be managed, not a person to be loved. But I did love you, he insisted. I still do. I studied his face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd grown so accustomed to. Instead, I saw something I hadn't expected: genuine remorse. Tell me about the divorce, I said. When she realized the money wasn't coming, she changed. She started talking about finding someone with better prospects, someone whose family had more to offer. He laughed bitterly. She said I'd failed her by not being able to control my own mother. And the baby? His face crumpled. She terminated the pregnancy, said she wasn't going to be tied down to a man who couldn't provide the lifestyle she deserved. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Whatever I thought of Emily, the loss of a grandchild I'd never know was a pain I hadn't expected. I'm sorry, David, that's unforgivable. She said it was your fault, that if you'd just given us the house, none of this would have happened. Do you believe that? He was quiet for a long time, staring out at my garden where butterflies danced among the flowers. I wanted to. It was easier than admitting I'd married someone who only loved me for what I could give her. The same way you only loved me for what I could give you. The words hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we wanted to cross. David's shoulders began to shake, and I realized he was crying, really crying. Not the manipulative tears I'd seen before, but the broken sobs of a man who'd finally understood what he'd lost. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry for everything, for not defending you, for taking you for granted, for letting her treat you the way she did. I'm sorry for not being the son you deserved. I watched him cry, this man who'd hurt me so deeply, and felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness that would take time. if it came at all, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. David, look at me. He lifted his head, his face red and wet with tears. I need you to understand something. I didn't change my will to punish you. I changed it to protect myself. I couldn't keep giving pieces of myself to people who saw those pieces as their right rather than my gift. I know, I see that now. Do you? Or are you just saying what you think I want to hear because you're hoping I'll change my mind about the money? The question hit him like a physical blow. I don't know. I want to say the money doesn't matter, but I can't honestly tell you that losing it didn't bring me here. His honesty surprised me. At least you're being truthful. I'm trying to be. I'm trying to figure out how to be the person you raised me to be instead of the person I became. And what would that look like? I don't know. Learning to live with less, maybe. Figuring out how to be alone without feeling sorry for myself. Calling you just to talk, not because I need something. And if I told you right now that the will isn't changing, that you'll never inherit this house or my money, what then? He was quiet for a long time. Then, I guess I'd have to learn to live with that. And maybe I'd ask if I could still visit sometimes. Not to convince you to change your mind, but just to spend time with you. Why? Because you're my mother, because I love you, even if I've done a terrible job of showing it, because I don't want to lose you completely. I looked at this man, my son, my greatest success and my deepest disappointment, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. The will isn't changing, David. His face fell, but he nodded. I understand. But you can visit, if you want to. If you can accept that this relationship has to be different from what it was before. Different how? Equal. No more expectations that I exist for your convenience. No more assumptions that my love comes without conditions. No more taking without giving. I'd like to try. It won't be easy. Trust is earned, not inherited. I know. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at my roses, finally planted and beginning to bloom. There's something else you should know. Silver Connections is planning to use this house as a residential facility in a few years, when I'm no longer able to live here alone. And you're okay with that. I'm looking forward to it, to being surrounded by people who understand what it's like to be discarded by family, and who've learned to make family out of friendship instead. Will there be room for family who want to do better? I turned back to him, seeing not the entitled man who'd demanded his inheritance, but the uncertain boy who'd once depended on me for everything. I suppose that depends on the family, doesn't it? He smiled then, a real smile that reminded me why I'd loved him so fiercely for so many years. Can I help you in the garden? I remember you used to let me plant things when I was little. I'd like that. As we walked outside together, I felt lighter than I had in decades. The money would still go to charity. The house would still become a haven for people like me. But maybe, just maybe, it would also become a place where a mother and son could learn to love each other again. Not out of obligation or expectation, but out of choice. It was more than I dared to hope for, and exactly what I'd been brave enough to demand a love worth having, or nothing at all. In the end, I'd gotten both. The next few months were a careful dance of rebuilding. David came over every Sunday afternoon. At first, our conversations were stilted, filled with awkward pauses and careful navigation around sensitive topics. But gradually, we found our rhythm again. He helped me plant a vegetable garden behind the house, the two of us working side by side in comfortable silence. I taught him how to make his father's favorite pasta sauce, a recipe he'd never bothered to learn when Robert was alive. We talked about books, about politics, about the memories we shared and the ones we'd missed in our years of estrangement. Not once did he mention the will or the money. Not once did he hint at wanting anything more than the chance to be my son again. One Sunday in July, as we sat on the patio drinking lemonade after an afternoon of gardening, he mentioned that he'd started seeing someone, a kindergarten teacher named Sarah, who volunteered at the same literacy program he'd recently joined. "She's nothing like Emily," he said, and there was no bitterness in his voice, just statement of fact. She grew up with almost nothing. Her dad walked out when she was 5, and her mom raised 4 kids on a waitress's salary, but she's the happiest person I've ever met. "She sounds lovely," I said, and meant it. "I'd like you to meet her, if that's okay. Not yet, it's still new, but someday." "I'd like that." He hesitated, then added, "She doesn't know about any of this, about the money, the house, the will. I don't want her to—" I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation, for hints that this was some elaborate scheme to get back into my good graces. I saw nothing but sincerity. "That's your choice, David. I want to do it differently this time. I want to be the kind of man who deserves someone like her. The kind of son who deserves someone like you." I reached across the table and took his hand. It was the first time we'd touched beyond brief hello and goodbye hugs since he'd started visiting again. "You're already becoming that man." Fall brought changes to the house and to our lives. I converted one of the spare bedrooms into a proper art studio with northern light and space for a large easel. Gloria Washington, my neighbor, convinced me to join an art collective that displayed work at the community center. To my surprise, my landscape sold well. David brought Sarah to Sunday dinner in October. She was everything he described: warm, genuine, with an easy laugh and eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. She treated me with respect but not deference, asked about my painting without patronizing, and clearly adored my son for himself, not his potential inheritance. As I watched them together, I saw a gentleness in David I hadn't witnessed since he was a child, a willingness to listen, to consider someone else's needs before his own. The man he was becoming was the man Robert and I had always hoped he would be. Winter came early that year, with snow in November and ice storms in December. David insisted on checking on me every few days, bringing groceries when the roads were bad, making sure my heat was working properly. Not because he was angling for anything, but because he cared. One evening, as we sat by the fire after he'd cleared my driveway of snow, he mentioned that he'd reconnected with his cousin Michael, Robert's nephew, whom we hadn't seen in years. "He has 2 kids now," David said. "They're great. The oldest, Emma, is really into art. I showed her some pictures of your paintings, and she wants to learn how to paint landscapes." "She's welcome to come over sometime," I offered. "I could show her a few techniques." David smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. I was thinking maybe we could do a family Christmas here. Nothing big, just Michael and his wife and kids. Maybe Sarah, if that's not too weird." "Only if you want to, of course." Family Christmas. The words brought back memories of holidays long past, Robert carving the turkey, David opening presents with childish delight, the house filled with laughter and love, things I'd thought were gone forever. I'd like that very much. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow blanketing the garden and icicles hanging from the eaves. I'd spent days preparing baking cookies, decorating a tree in the living room, wrapping small gifts for everyone, including Emma's art supplies and a building set for her younger brother. David arrived early to help set up, bringing Sarah, who immediately took over the kitchen with cheerful efficiency. Michael and his family came at noon, the children's excitement filling the house with energy and joy. As we gathered around the table for dinner, I looked at these people, some related by blood, some by choice, and felt a sense of contentment I hadn't experienced in years. This was family. Not the obligation or expectation that had defined my relationship with David and Emily, but the genuine care and respect that came from choosing to be in each other's lives. "Before we eat," David said, standing with his glass raised, "I'd like to propose a toast to Mom for opening her home and her heart to all of us today, and to Dad, who taught us what really matters in life, not money or possessions, but the people we love and the time we spend with them. To Linda and Robert," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. As we ate and laughed and shared stories, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from the humiliation of that birthday dinner to the peace of this Christmas celebration, from being valued only for what I could provide to being loved for who I was. I'd lost things along the way, the grandchild I would never know, the years of estrangement from my son, the simple trust that had once defined our relationship. But I'd gained so much more self-respect, true friends, a renewed sense of purpose, and now, perhaps, a second chance at family. After dinner, as the children played with their new toys and the adults relaxed with coffee in the living room, David sat beside me on the sofa. "Thank you for today," he said quietly. "For everything." "You're welcome. I've been thinking about what you said about Silver Connections using the house someday." I tensed slightly, wondering if this was finally going to be about the money again. "It's a good plan," he continued, "but I was wondering if maybe, in the meantime, you might consider letting me help with some of the maintenance. Not because I expect anything in return, but because I'd like to do something for you for a change." I studied his face, looking for hidden motives, but saw only sincerity. "I'd appreciate that," I said finally. "And maybe next spring, we could expand the vegetable garden. Emma's really interested in growing things, and I thought it might be nice for her to have a project here. I think that's a wonderful idea." As the evening wound down and our guests prepared to leave, Emma came running up to me, her dark eyes serious beneath her curly hair. "Aunt Linda," she said, using the title we'd decided on earlier, "can I come paint with you sometime? Dad says you're really good." "I would love that, Emma, anytime." She threw her arms around my waist in a spontaneous hug before running off to collect her coat. The simple gesture brought tears to my eyes, the easy affection of a child who saw me as someone interesting and valuable, not just an old woman to be tolerated or an asset to be claimed. After everyone had gone and David was helping me clean up the kitchen, he cleared his throat nervously. "Mom, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." "What is it?" "Sarah and I have been talking about getting married. Nothing formal yet, just discussions. But if we do, would you consider being part of the ceremony? Maybe helping with the planning or something?" I set down the dish I was drying and turned to face him. "Are you sure? After everything that happened with Emily, DIL?" "That's exactly why I'm sure. I don't want to make the same mistakes again. I want to build a life with someone who values the right things. And I want you to be part of that life, if you're willing." I thought about how far we'd come in the past year, from the broken relationship that had led me to change my will to this cautious new beginning. "I'd be honored, David." Later that night, after David had gone home and the house was quiet again, I sat in my favorite chair by the fire, looking at the twinkling lights of the Christmas tree. The day had been everything I could have hoped for, and more. I picked up the framed photo of Robert that I kept beside my chair. "You should have seen it," I told him, tracing his face with my finger. The house full of people again. David becoming the man we always knew he could be. I could almost hear his voice in my head, warm and reassuring. "I told you you deserved better, Linda." Yes, he had. And finally, after all these years, I had believed him. The will remained unchanged. The house would still go to Silver Connections someday, providing a home for elderly people who needed community and care. That was a promise I intended to keep. But in the meantime, it had become something I'd never expected: a place of healing, of second chances, of family redefined on better, healthier terms. I hadn't won by getting my son back. I'd won by finding myself again, my strength, my worth, my ability to love without losing myself in the process. Everything else was just a bonus. As I headed upstairs to bed, I paused at the window overlooking the garden, now covered in snow, but waiting patiently for spring, for new growth, for another chance to bloom, just like us, to be delivered after my death. Dear David, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've just discovered that you've been removed from my will. I know this may come as a shock, despite our conversations over the years, and I want to explain my reasons one last time. When I changed my will all those years ago, it wasn't done out of anger or a desire to punish you. It was an act of self-preservation, a way to protect myself from being seen as nothing more than a source of inheritance, a resource rather than a person. The money and the house are going to Silver Connections because I believe in their mission. I've seen firsthand how older people can be discarded by the very families they sacrificed everything for, and I want to be part of the solution to that problem. But more importantly, I want you to understand that what we rebuilt together was far more valuable than any inheritance I could have left you. We found our way back to a relationship based on respect and genuine care, not obligation or expectation. We learned that family isn't defined by blood or money, but by how we treat each other. In the years since that terrible birthday dinner, you became the son I always knew you could be, not because of anything I did, but because you chose to grow and change. You chose to see me as a person worthy of respect and love. You chose to be present in my life without expecting anything in return. That transformation is your true inheritance. David, not money or property, but the knowledge that you became a man your father would have been proud of. A man I was proud to call my son. I hope you'll understand and respect my decision. I hope you'll continue the work we started together, being a father who values his children for who they are, not what they can provide. Being a man who recognizes the worth of people beyond their utility or convenience. Most of all, I hope you'll remember that it's never too late to choose a different path, to become the person you were always meant to be. We proved that together, and it was the greatest gift either of us could have given or received. With all my love. Mom. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here. Arikayo.